can get that going. All right then. So these are a few reasons why Age Equity Alliance advocates that companies make age equity a part of their DEI strategic initiative. But to convince leaders, it's really important that we dive a little deeper into the topic. And so today, what I'm sharing with you is a portion of a 90-minute interactive webinar that Age Equity Alliance shares with organizations called How to Build an Age-Inclusive Workplace. And although today's session offers a condensed version of one of the 3 modules within that training, by the end of this session, you should really have a very clear understanding of how age bias presents in the workplace across the age spectrum, how the workplace is negatively impacted by age bias, and how the steps that leaders can take right now to demonstrate age equity. But before I go into that, I'd really like to tell you a little bit more about Age Equity Alliance and the work that we've been doing for almost 2 years to create age equity in the workplace. As I mentioned already, we're a volunteer-run 501c3 nonprofit working with companies and organizations and communities and government entities to evaluate and address age equity gaps. So in addition to training and age equity evaluations, consulting and speaking, we are also knowledge partners with AARP, the World Economic Forum, and the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development for their global collaboration on this multi-generational initiative called Living, Learning, and Earning Longer. And we're very proud to be a part of that collaboration because it mirrors what we're about as well. And that is really addressing age issues across the age spectrum. And I believe that that's one of the things that really separates Age Equity Alliance from some of the other people doing the work in this space. All of the work is important. Our work is just a little bit different. Our YouTube channel hosts over 100 short educational videos. Most of them are under 3 minutes. And these are great resources. They're great for training starters or easy social media shares to just help spread the word about the importance of age equity and what it takes to get there. So with that, let's get the show on the road. So before, I talk about implicit bias, which is really certainly very, very leveraging part of some of the issues that we see in the workplace around age bias, I want to talk a little bit about a topic that's become my life's work, and that is diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I bet you thought I was going to say age, right? Well, actually, it's a little bit of both, and I'll explain why. So I talk about age diversity, and that's how age is often the target of bias and discriminatory language and behavior in the workplace that goes unchecked. But it's about diversity, age diversity. I talk about age equity, not only because it reduces litigation risks, but also because it increases workplace productivity and business outcomes. And I talk about age inclusion because a company culture that is diverse, equitable, and inclusive creates an environment that's conducive to belonging. And a sense of belonging is what all companies should want their employees to feel, because study after study indicates that employee belonging positively impacts the culture as well as the company's bottom line. Later today, I'll be presenting a program on how age equity impacts the culture of belonging, because there is so much at play there that impacts not only employees, but customers and stakeholders. So I'd love for you to come back for that session too. So now let's jump a little bit deeper into age DEI and look at age bias and how it shows up in the workplace, and learn how we can identify it and understand how to call it out. And most importantly, create the workplace change that leads to a fully diverse, inclusive, and equitable workplace. So like the effort to remove bias and myth and stereotypes that are associated with any dimension of diversity, age equity is complex. My goal today is to break this down so that by the end of our session, you'll be much clearer about the issues and feel motivated to become age equity change makers. And if I do it right, you'll understand why it takes everyone across the age spectrum to create a workplace that we all want to age in, which is another topic deserving of its own session later today. So let's begin by assuming that most age bias and discrimination is implicit. In other words, it's not conscious and it's not malicious. And implicit bias is defined by leading gerontologist and researcher on age and aging, Becca Levy, as occurring when a culture's ageist stereotypes are internalized. They become part of this subconscious framework of society, and that's expressed through implicit ageism. So in the workplace, it could look like this. A new sales software is being deployed, but older workers are not invited to attend the training. It's important to think about the stereotypes and myths that prevent the continued focus of training and development for older workers. So I'd like to ask you what you think. Maybe if I could ask you to drop your thoughts in the chat. You know, what pervasive myths and stereotypes do you think prevent older workers from benefiting from continued company-sponsored training and education? Just drop your thoughts in the chat. Right, that they may not be interested in learning. Thank you, Jennifer. Nice to see you here. What other pervasive myths might we have? Too set in their ways. Absolutely, Marlo. Yeah, they're too set in their ways. Anybody else? So these two stereotypes are absolutely some of the driving factors that deplete older workers from the same opportunities that others have. John says, unable to adapt to anything new. Right, absolutely. Thank you, John. Thank you all for sharing. I really appreciate that. Okay, so let's go back to Levy's definition. When ageist stereotypes are internalized, they then become a default behavior. And that's actually very dangerous because 95% of our decisions and actions and emotions and behavior goes beyond our conscious awareness. And this is according to cognitive neuroscientists. So if 95% of our brain activity is beyond our conscious awareness, that means that we're operating on our default biases all the time. And that often predicts our thoughts, our words, and our behaviors. And so that means that by default, older employees would be overlooked for training or promotion or retraining to fill a skills gap. They'll be overlooked, they'll be the first to be considered for redundancy due to reorganization or acquisition and mergers. But what else happens when ageist stereotypes are internalized? They actually become self-fulfilling prophecies. And so, and it works like this. So if an older employee already believes or come to believe the ageist messages that they've been subjected to, then in the example that I gave above, if the older employee accepts exclusion from the training, then as a result, they set themselves up for redundancy down the road because they're technologically out of date. And then if they accept the redundancy, believing that it's time for them to step aside and let younger people have their job, then the myth becomes self-fulfilling, and it perpetuates this endless cycle of ageism. There's an interesting study done by a team of researchers that I met, one from the University of Amsterdam and the other from the University of Kent in Canterbury. And their research demonstrates how older workers often make employment decisions, whether to apply for a job, whether to resign, whether to ask for a promotion. All of these employment decisions are made based on these internal ageist narratives, like, do I deserve to still be working when there's so many others who would love to have my job? So, so there are also subtle forms of ageism in the workplace, jokes about senior moments, or assuming that an older person is unaware of certain apps or technology. So for example, if a younger colleague made the comment like, oh, you don't know anything about how to market on TikTok, to an older colleague, if the comment assumed ability that was directly related to age, then it would be ageist. Likewise, if an older colleague said something to a younger colleague about, well, you know, your ideas are too outside of the box, and that was directly linked to the fact that the person was young and coming from a completely different mindset, then that would also be an age bias. So it also manifests in the workplace more overtly and aggressively, and people actually pressuring older workers to retire to free up a position for a younger professional. I was just on the phone last night with someone who questioned whether a 75-year-old who was looking for work really should be looking for work, or should that person allow younger people to have that job. And that's just this lump of labor fallacy, that people think that there's just this finite number of jobs. But all of this said, older workers are not the only ones that are subject to age bias in the workplace. Younger workers experience it too. Historically, most of the research on age bias and discrimination across the age spectrum that includes age bias and discriminatory behaviors against younger people, it comes out of Europe, because European countries don't define age at a certain point at which age discrimination can occur. Unlike the US, where the Age Discrimination in Employment Act establishes that age-related workplace protections begin at 40. So I'm just going to check. Oh, the PowerPoint cropped out. Uh-oh. Okay, let me go back to it. All right, let me see what we got here. Thanks, Jennifer. All right, here we got it. It's okay now, good. Oops, there we go. All right. So in 2020, Harvard Business Review published an article citing that age bias occurs across the age spectrum. In fact, age bias and discrimination is at play anytime a comment or a decision about a person is based on their age and the perceived or assumed stereotypes that are associated with that particular age group. So the article talked about the fact that younger adults are more likely to report experiencing ageism than their middle-aged or older counterparts. And there is a psychological self-protective factor that comes into play as people age, but that doesn't erase the fact that age bias and discrimination impacts people across the age spectrum, although most prominently at the entry levels and late stages. So what does age bias look like at early career stage? Well, it typically manifests, let me go back, it typically manifests with dismissive tones, lack of leadership opportunities, low wages for the same skill set, and this expectation of 24/7 availability in exchange for a free lunch on Friday. And it also comes up with languaging, words such as, youngsters, or calling, younger employees kids, or women girls, or making statements like, well, one day you'll understand, or when you have more experience under your belt. So equating age with immaturity and inexperience, describing a worker as wet behind the ears or a young whippersnapper, all of these things I've heard in the workplace. I don't know about you, but even requiring a minimum number of years experience for a particular job, even when that skill can be easily acquired through schooling or self-directed training or volunteering, could be considered discriminatory against a younger person. But as the author of the Harvard Business Review article wrote, when older workers doubt the competency of younger workers, they fail them. They're not helping the younger workers develop transferable skills, and they're building barriers of mistrust. And so what happens when younger and older people mistrust each other? Well, they become divided and they lash out. And generational bashing goes both ways. And so I want to share an example. This was just from this past week. Gad Livingston, Levinan, he's the head of Labor Market Institute at the Conference Board. And the Conference Board is a nonprofit research group, very reputable. I was part of their organization many years ago when I worked in the corporate world. Very, very respected and reputable. Anyway, Gad posted a question on LinkedIn, and his question was, how many people 60 and older would return to the workplace in the next 12 months? And it literally took 2 comments before ageism reared its ugly head. So this was the first comment from Mike. And Mike said, 30 years is a long time to pay for leisure and healthcare. People should work as long as they can. And then Mr. Russell responded, well, that's one argument, but the other is that they're past peak productivity. What? And that it creates 2 or 3 jobs, as well as opening leadership roles for people who retire. And that's long overdue for Gen Xers starting to approach age 60. Wow. Well, you know that I commented on this and really pointed out the ageist, the age bias behind the remark, and also the fact that if one person can retire and they can hire 3 younger people, they're not paying them enough. I mean, seriously. But anyway, so this is blatant ageist rhetoric, and here is the issue. These kind of comments are posted as if they're fact. I see them in the media all the time. I write about it for Forbes. And this is exactly what Rebecca Levy meant when she said implicit bias is so interwoven into the cultural fabric that people don't even think about it as a bias at all. So again, it's important to think about, okay, what are the stereotypes? What are the myths surrounding this belief that older workers are past their prime, especially when study after study shows that not to be the case. So here's another, let me just take you to another example. I'm gonna stop talking for just a minute so you have time to absorb this. This was posted on LinkedIn. And of course, I commented on this too. But before I jump into what I think about this ad, I would really like to ask you to drop your thoughts into the chat. Tell me what you think about it. Definitely discriminatory. Absolutely. Absolutely discriminatory. So when I responded, one group does not, exactly, Jennifer, one group does not need to be derided to make a case for the other. Although the millennial marketing thing is really annoying, as if older people do not shop. Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you for sharing. I really appreciate that. So the way I responded to this, because it was a public group, it was actually someone that I had done some interviewing with. And all I said to the person was that there are an infinite number of ways to communicate this message without generation bashing. And I put that in the public comment, in the public forum, because we have to call out age bias when we see it. John says it's using generational stereotypes, and we are all individuals. Yes, we are all individuals. You can't group everybody into one big lump and think we're all going to be the same. We all feel the same. We all have the same wants, desires, working styles. It's just not like that. So I agree that it's very important to have older people represented in advertising. Absolutely, I agree. But words that humiliate, that shame, that insult, that doesn't win the battle. So here's just a short list of some of the ways I think this kind of language is hurtful. Like you've just said, you know, it insults an entire generation of people for what a small number of advertising executives are doing. It lashes out at the symptom, not the disease. It resorts to name calling, which is divisive and inciting. It points to everyone between the ages of 25 and 40 as incompetent and incapable of living independently. How absurd is this? It shames intergenerational living. And I've seen a lot of parents moving in with younger children for economic reasons. It goes both ways. There is no shame in that. In fact, my 32-year-old son has been asking me for the last several years to move in with him and his wife. And so this idea of intergenerational living is becoming more popular all of the time. In fact, there are developers out in California that are designing intergenerational housing that offers, you know, private living spaces for multiple families under one roof. There's no shame in that. But it perpetuates age myths by making one generation look bad and other in order to make another one look better, just like Jennifer said. So what do we do to change this? You know, how do you call out this kind of age bias? So, well, I call it out a little more blatantly, only because this is my work, this is my area of expertise, and I feel comfortable naming it what it is and citing resources that support the fact that it is age bias and discrimination. But not everyone feels comfortable doing that. And so what I always suggest people do when they want to call out ageism, and maybe it's a colleague or you know, it's someone on social media that they're connected with, just ask the question, what makes you believe that XYZ, fill in the blank? What makes you believe that? And just asking the question is often enough to make the person step back and then try to justify. And you know, Ashton Applewhite, who is a friend and a colleague and a mentor, she tells me that these, she calls them, you know, public, well, I won't tell you what she calls them. But anyway, what she says is that these online debates are almost never winnable. But the benefit is in the takeaway for everyone else who's reading along. We may not be able to change the mind of the person who makes the ageist comment, but for everyone else that reads the dialogue that goes back and forth between the two, that's who you're going to be educating. So, just another reason to have the dialogue. Of course, if you're not comfortable doing that in a social media platform where the information is posted, you can always, ask them the question privately. And if if they have respect for you, and if you have a good relationship, then maybe they're open to hearing your perspective. Yeah, Jennifer says, what makes you say that? Yes, absolutely. What makes you say that? What makes you believe that? What makes you say that? Absolutely. So what can leaders do right now to begin demonstrating age equity? So I always tell companies that the first place to start is to ensure that age equity is a part of their DEI programming. Because if they're not talking about it, then they're not going to be calling it out. If they're not talking about it in the workplace, they're not helping their employees understand the many ways that it manifests. So that's absolutely critical. There's also this fact that age bias, myths, and stereotypes have the potential to amplify the potential bias and discrimination across other dimensions of diversity, such as race or gender, sexual orientation. This intersectionality in this way can become a double, triple, or even quadruple threat for potential age bias and discrimination. So very important for DEI practitioners in HR to be talking about age. Conducting a complete age equity audit. And so really what that means is a review of all the policies and processes to ensure that age is included. So for example, is age included in the company's anti-discrimination and harassment policies? Does the diversity recruiting strategy include age as a dimension of diversity that they're recruiting for? And if it doesn't, it certainly should. Avoid generational labels. This whole thing about Gen Z and Millennial and Gen X and Boomer, and they've been these generational labels have been used to create myths and stereotypes. And now whenever we hear them and we use them, there's always kind of like this kind of subtle context that goes along with it. And it's not typically positive. So avoid using generational labels altogether. Don't lump older workers into one category, like 40 and older. Call the ages what they are. Refer to specific age ranges if necessary, or default if you need to tenure brackets. So 30 to 39 or 60 to 69, for example. Report age demographics as a demonstration of your age IQ. Be transparent. Your employees appreciate that. Prospective employees appreciate that. Customers and stakeholders appreciate that. Review websites. This is a really, really important one, because when Age Equity Alliance conducts an age equity analysis, one of the first things that we look for is imaging. We click through all the pages on internal and external websites. And when you do that, what do you see? What do the faces look like? What do they represent? Is there diversity of race and gender and family structure and ability and age? If all of the faces are diverse, but they're all under the age of 30, you're not there yet. That's not a good sign, because age goes across every dimension of diversity. So what message does that send your customers? What message does it send potential applicants? What message does it send your current employees? So age equity branding means ensuring that the images on the company website reflect the full spectrum of diversity that's present in the customer base and the talent pool. It's also really important to look on your website for languaging. For example, the employee, the equal opportunity statement. So oftentimes you have to go into the career portal to find that, or even click onto a job to see what it is. But you would be surprised. I mean, I'm still surprised how many companies, big and small, have all of the protected categories there, but omit age. I mean, I just can't believe it. It just blows my mind, really. But so that's part of the age equity analysis. You know, you're reviewing the policies, you're reviewing the processes, and you're looking at the messaging that you're sending both internally to your employees as well as externally. Actively create mixed age teams. It's important when creating a diverse, inclusive, equitable corporate culture. That is a proactive, ongoing process. It never ends. And so when it comes to age, assembling teams look to put people together that are in different ages so that they can learn from each other. And actually, there are so many studies that show that when people work together, when they get to know each other, when they spend time together, then that breaks down some of those barriers and assumptions that people have about each other. Another recommendation is to sponsor an age equity employee resource groups. So employee resource groups provide a safe place for people to discuss age-related concerns. Then they can partner with leaders in the organization who then can investigate and address the concerns. For example, I've worked with some ERGs where they've observed that promotional opportunities are only being offered to younger employees and not the older ones. And so their ERG collectively went to their executive sponsor and expressed that concern. And now they're working on that. They're looking into that. And so that's one of the benefits of ERGs that are age focused. At the other end of the age spectrum, you know, are younger workers being dismissed for challenging developmental assignments, or are they given an unfair share of tedious work? Age Equity Alliance has a special program called EveryGen, and we partner with employee resource groups in organizations to help them develop mission and develop goals, and also to provide resources to them, such as speakers that fit within their budget. So, and that has been a very, very popular offering because, yeah, somebody said that's a great idea. An age equity ESG, absolutely. We're finding a lot of people are very interested in doing that. Now, I'll share with you, when I worked in diversity, equity, and inclusion for a global organization previously, and this was back in the 2000, let's see, when was it? Late 2000s. Anyway, I left the organization in 2011. So at the time, and I worked there for about 12 years doing this particular work, we had age-related ERGs even back then. But what we had was we had an early career employee resource group, and we had a what they were called primetime partner resource group. But when I consult with organizations now who are thinking about putting together an ERG that's focused on age, I try to encourage them not to necessarily separate the groups into early career or late stage career, because there's so much learning to be had by talking to each other and sharing the concerns on both ends of the age spectrum. So I really like the idea of age equity ERG. I've also seen some called multi-generation or intergenerational. So it doesn't matter as long as people are talking about age issues across the age spectrum and trying to create more inclusion and equity around age. And finally, it's so important to educate leaders. Leaders have to lead by example. Age equity is no exception, but leaders don't know what they don't know, which is why it's critical that leadership understands the urgency of creating diverse, age equitable organizations. And in fact, that's the only way that they're going to survive in the future of work, given the demographic shifts. And actually, the future of work is what our next session is going to be on with workplace futurist Marty Constant, who is the author of the book Career Agility. So as we wrap up, I'd like to ask you to, drop a note in the chat box and tell me, oh, not that one. We've already done that one. Just tell me, what is your biggest takeaway? And how are you going to incorporate that takeaway into a call to action for enhancing age equity where you are? So what is your takeaway, and how will you turn that into a call to action? And John says there should be more focus on age risk and managing the demographic risks of an aging population in the workplace. So John, I would love for you to tell me a little bit more about that. Actually, let me take you off. How about you just chat with me? That would be awesome. If you come off mute and chat with me about it. Would you be willing? Hi, John.
Hello, Sheila.
How are you?
Very well, thank you.
Good. So tell me more about the age risk.
Well, it's just the thought that there is a lot of attention these days focused on a number of different risks. Clearly, there's a lot of climate risk or cyber risk. And I've never seen very much focus on age risk. And yet, with the demographic changes that are going on, people living longer, clearly, I think you have to think about age as a potential risk to corporations.
Absolutely.
And the way they structure themselves and the way they think about all of their programs. And you've touched upon many of them here, including hiring through the benefits program. I think we haven't talked about, caring, because there's an awful lot of issue around caring as people get older as well. Not just about themselves, but them giving caring to others. But in terms of just managing age risk, I just haven't seen that many articles or anything around that. There are, now more and more models around climate risk and, predicting catastrophes and how you reduce that risk and data associated with that. But there ain't much data or models around aging, at least not in the public domain. And that's just.
That's brilliant. And absolutely, age risk is part of a business risk. And I am really, really glad that you put that in the chat. And I'm really glad that you came off mute to tell us more about your thoughts behind that. That's very enriching. And I'm actually going to make a note about that. And maybe I could talk to you separately. We could write something up. If nothing's been written, we should write it. Don't you think, John?
We could do that.
Awesome. Jennifer says that she's interested in the impacts of avoidance of age equity into the DEI discussion. Essentially, it perpetuates ageist practices, many of which are unintended. Absolutely. Interested in the impacts of the avoidance. Jennifer, would you want to come off mute and tell us more about your thoughts on that?
Sure. Hi, Sheila.
Hi.
Thanks for doing this today. Yeah, I was just thinking about this as you were having this part of the discussion, that if the DEI officers in organizations continue to refuse to bring age equity into the discussion, it both, enables those biases to continue, because people are often unaware that they are doing that they are holding, these biases and practicing them in different subtle and sometimes very much unintended ways. And it also just it devalues the importance as well. It's like either it enables it and or it devalues the importance of that conversation. And just sort of keeping it undercover, and also just avoidance of, as you also mentioned, the intersectional impacts of avoiding that discussion. So, this, I don't know, I'm just, the practice of keeping that discussion on the down low. I mean, it also sort of, there's a sort of shame around that there's a shame of aging and being older too. And I think that can be part of some of the issue. So it's just like, we need to be transparent and bring this into the light.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing, Jennifer. I really appreciate that. So we've got 6 more, no, actually 5 more, because I had to cancel one of our board members who was going to speak today. She got stuck in the UK, and with all this new variant stuff, I mean, the airlines are being extra stringent, which is what we want them to do. But just want to quickly let you know what's coming up next. At the top of the next hour, I'll have Marty Constant, as I mentioned with you, workplace futurist. She'll be talking about why every team needs a Yoda, and a baby Yoda too. So she'll actually be talking about a lot about, addressing what organizations need to do to be agile, to adapt to the changing demographics. Not only people living longer and wanting to work and needing to work longer, but the fact that the birth rates are dropping and there's just not enough talent coming up the pipeline. So how can organizations be agile around those demographic shifts? And it's almost like, John, what you were talking to, addressing the age risk, actually. So then at 11, we will have Ashton Applewhite talking about ageism, ableism, and the myths that drive them. I think most of you know Ashton is a main stage TED speaker and global age advocate. So we're very happy to have her coming up at 11. Then at noon, we have Daniel Jolis, who is a psychologist and a researcher and a PhD candidate studying age. And he will be sharing some research on implicit bias and the controversies and critical perspectives. Implicit bias training has gotten such a bad rap, and he's going to be talking about that and actually questioning, the validity of it himself. So that's a very interesting training that you may be interested in. And after that, I'll be back talking to you about how age equity impacts a culture of belonging. Because as I said earlier, there is so much to unpack about that. I'll be talking about what I call the shadow threat of future ageism, and how when younger employees see older employees being displaced or not being given the same opportunities, it creates this shadow threat within them, whether they're aware of it or not. And that impacts employees' trust and sense of belonging with organizations. So this is really, really huge. Then finally, we'll end the day at 3 p.m. That's Eastern time with Meyer Nassar. Meyer Nassar is a labor and employment attorney, and he will be talking about in the U.S. the current congressional legislation that supports age equity, and why it's really important for us to get behind it and ask our senators to do the same. So thank you so much for joining me. I so much appreciate it. It's been great having you here. And I just want to let everybody know that all of this Giving Tuesday is complimentary. Of course, tax-deductible donations are greatly accepted if you'd like to contribute to our Giving Tuesday fundraiser. And you can do all of that on our website at ageequityalliance.org. So that's it. I thank you again for being with me today, and I hope that I see you all again soon. Take care, everybody.